I'm Nima Rajan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is promising to come back with a new throne speech next month to reset his Liberal government's agenda in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
As our first step to make this plan a reality, we will present a speech from the throne on Wednesday, September 23rd. This is the same week that the House of Commons was already scheduled to return. The throne speech will give us the opportunity to lay out in detail our approach going forward. It will also allow Parliament to hold a confidence vote on this new plan. Today, I have asked the Governor-General to prorogue Parliament, which must happen before any government can present a throne speech.
Conservative members of Parliament are scheduled to hold a news conference on the prorogation and the We Charity controversy later today. The prorogation comes on the heels of Bill Morneau's resignation as Finance Minister and appointment of Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland to replace him in a mini-cabinet shuffle Tuesday at Rideau Hall. The Prime Minister's move will reset the legislative agenda, shutting down committees along with their probes of the We Charity controversy and clearing away any unfinished work. Meanwhile, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is slamming the Prime Minister's call to prorogue Parliament until next month.
The news of the Finance Minister's resignation yesterday gives me no joy. This is a government that is was fighting itself, that has been working for the betterment of their own, themselves as Liberals and their close friends, and that means Canadians are hurting. And Canadians hurting is something that keeps me up at night. It's something I'm worried about.
Mr. Singh says shutting down Parliament in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis is wrong. The PM is promising to come back with a new throne speech next month, which will also prompt a confidence vote. Well, this as Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ordered thousands of documents connected to the We Charity controversy to be handed directly over to the Commons Finance Committee. It is being seen as an effort to get any controversy associated with them out of the way well before Parliament reopens, following prorogation next month. Many of the documents support the PM's version of events, that federal public servants recommended We Charity administer a student service grant program. Still, they also suggest that Youth Minister Bardish Chagger helped get We on her bureaucrats' radar, and political staff in Bill Morneau's office helped keep it there. A business lobby group says it looks forward to working with Chrystia Freeland in her new role as Federal Finance Minister. Dan Kelly of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has tweeted that Minister Freeland has a proven ability to work with people, even when there are areas of disagreement. Mr. Kelly adds that has been missing in the Finance Department for several years. Ontario's Conservative Premier Doug Ford also says that he's one of Minister Freeland's biggest fans, and she will do an incredible job in her new role. An evacuee from one of BC's latest wildfire threats says he was already prepared with emergency boxes. John Green says residents around Okanagan Falls have become accustomed to the threat of wildfires, but he had hoped to avoid them, especially this year, while already dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. BC wildfire figures show that nearly 100 wildfires have ignited across the province in just the past few days. The Canada Energy Regulator is forecasting a 6.6% drop in Canadian oil production this year to an average of 4.38 million barrels per day. The average production in Canada in 2019 was 4.69 million BPD, up from 4.58 million in 2018. The federal regulator says it expects oil production to gradually recover over the balance of 2020 after producers halted what analysts estimate was as much as 1 million BPD at times due to low prices during the COVID-19 pandemic economic slowdown. Credit reporting agency TransUnion Canada says Canadians have been taking on mortgage debt, not credit card debt, during the COVID-19 pandemic. New mortgages, renewals and refinances are up 29% from a year ago, with a 5.3% annual increase in the total volume of mortgage debt compared to 2019. Meantime, credit card balances fell 12.3% in the second quarter compared to the same period a year ago. TransUnion's Matt Fabian says reduced opportunities for spending during the lockdown may have contributed to the drop, but he also noted that people are opting to dip into savings or retirement funds rather than relying on credit cards. Diane Finley says she's had a heck of a ride as the longtime Conservative MP for the Ontario riding of Haldimand, Norfolk. But it's time to move forward. Calling her time in Parliament the honour of her life, Ms. Finley says her name will not be on the ballot in the next election. Under former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Ms. Finley served in multiple cabinet posts, and in opposition, she was the go-between for MPs and the National Party. Up next, a deeper look into the CRA hacking incident that saw thousands of Canadian accounts compromised. We'll be right back. Earlier this week, hackers compromised thousands of Canadian government accounts, including more than 9,000 GC Key accounts and 5,500 CRA accounts. The hackers were able to change bank account information and apply for government benefits, all while posing as the owner of the account. The revelation forced the Canada Revenue Agency to shut down its online services temporarily on Monday. All the hacked accounts have been cancelled and an investigation is underway. However, cybersecurity and privacy experts are warning that the thousands of Canadians affected by this attack could still be vulnerable to other attacks. The Canada Revenue Agency said Monday that they will be sending a letter to all the Canadians who were hacked. But there is growing concern that by the time they receive a letter, their information could be used again by hackers. So what can Canadians do right now to protect their information and prevent future cyber attacks like this one? Well, joining me now is the CEO of Cyber Hunter Solutions, Mr. Chris Dodunsky. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Good afternoon.
So can you take us through how the hackers were able to get through a secured government website?
Yeah, so how it basically happens is through password reuse. And people use their same passwords over and over again in all kinds of different sites. And typically what happens is there is a breach somewhere. The credentials are stolen, and then these lists are compiled, and there are literally billions and billions of records out there of stolen passwords. But effectively, hackers use these lists against things like government services and critical systems that people have access to, bank accounts, for example. So they will just keep trying over and over again with various lists of passwords, but it all boils down to reusing the same password over and over again for different things.
And can this technique be used on other private online accounts?
Absolutely. So anywhere you reuse your password, let's say you use the password 12345 and you use it on system number 1. Let's say that company gets hacked. They have your username, they have your password. Well, if you use 12345 at all your other sites, maybe your email accounts, other generic services that are out there, they will ultimately stuff your credentials into the login, and they will get in. So.
Now, you mentioned that there are billions of these passwords online, and some cybersecurity experts also mentioned the dark web having these passwords so that hackers can buy or sell them. Can you tell us more about this instance, the dark web, and how it works?
Yeah, so the dark web is basically a marketplace for the exchange of information that is typically illicitly gathered by somebody. So they steal a credit card, they steal a password, they steal something, and it is up for sale on the dark web. And typically, people can buy things on the dark web that are illegal using cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and other services. But effectively, these lists go up for sale. People buy them, people use them for various purposes, and it could be that more than one threat actor actually has these passwords because they are for sale for really anybody who wants to buy them. So.
And where do you think this attack came from, and why right now?
So where it came from is really kind of could be anywhere. The attacks are opportunistic. So credential stuffing attacks do take a long time. They involve millions or hundreds of millions or even billions of passwords. Attackers have to keep using tools, and they have to rotate their IP addresses to look different all the time. If a hacker tries, 1,000 different usernames and logins using the same IP address and the same browser, or something that looks like the same browser, most security systems will see that as an attack and try and stop that. But if a hacker will rotate their IP addresses and change the way their browser looks every single time they log in, it looks like these login attempts are coming from all over the world, from really anywhere, and they will look more human, and therefore they are harder to do. But you have to have patience when you're doing these types of attacks. So it is an opportunistic thing, typically somewhere between 1 in 1,000, and is typical in terms of, if I have 1 million passwords, maybe I'll get 1,000.
I apologize, but we have about 20 seconds left in this interview. What can Canadians do to protect their information online?
Definitely use a unique password. Every single site, every single service that you use online, make sure it's unique. Use a password manager. A lot of password managers now will actually comb the dark web for you and tell you if your password exists somewhere in the dark web.
All right, sir. Thank you again for your expertise on this issue. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, well, after the break, Newfoundland and Labrador swears in a new premier, and StatsCan releases their inflation report. More news from around the world coming up after the break, so stay tuned. Newfoundland and Labrador officially have a new premier today. Surgeon and Charity CEO Andrew Furey was sworn in as premier in St. John's after winning the provincial Liberal leadership 2 weeks ago, replacing Dwight Ball. The clock is already ticking as the unelected premier, Furey, must win a seat in the provincial legislature within 12 months of his swearing in. The Alberta government says its Fair Deal panel, created to determine better ways for the province to assert itself in Confederation, came in 43% under budget. It says total costs associated with the panel's work came to less than $375,000, despite unexpected challenges due to COVID-19. The panel issued a report in May calling for a provincial pension plan and police force. Premier Jason Kenney has said he would explore those options. Statistics Canada says the Consumer Price Index was up 0.1% compared with a year ago, as gasoline prices were down nearly 15%. Excluding the drop in gasoline prices, the inflation barometer would have increased at an annual rate of 0.7%, matching the same reading for June. The average economist estimate had been for a year-over-year increase of 0.5% for July, according to financial data firm Refinitiv. Newfoundland and Labrador's top doctor says a mandatory mask order aims to get people used to wearing them ahead of a possible second wave of COVID-19 in the fall. Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Janice Fitzgerald, says that despite there being only 2 active cases, she expects people to interact more often when schools resume next month. Beginning next week, mask wearing will be mandatory in all indoor public places across the province. A new Angus Reid Institute survey of more than 1,500 Canadians suggests that nearly half of those polled say they are following all COVID-19 public health guidelines. However, residents of the prairie provinces were found to be the least likely to follow any of the recommendations aimed at preventing the spread of the novel coronavirus. The poll found that those in Saskatchewan were the most likely to flout the safety guidelines, with Manitoba and Alberta tied for second. Turning to France, where it is now mandating masks in all workplaces, from the Paris business district to factories in the provinces. The government is trying to contain the growing COVID-19 infections, but avoid shutting down the economy. France's daily infection count jumped past 3,000 over the weekend for the first time since May. About a quarter of the 1,000 virus clusters that have emerged since France ended its strict virus lockdown in May were traced to workplaces. The temperature hit a scorching 54.4 Celsius on Sunday in Death Valley, California, which would be the hottest temperature recorded on Earth in August. The World Meteorological Organization's extreme temperature team is investigating the mark. If confirmed, it would only be below the disputed all-time record of 56.67 Celsius at nearly the same spot in 1913, and a 55 Celsius temperature recorded in Tunisia in 1931. But both of those readings were in July, which is traditionally the planet's hottest month. French champagne producers decided yesterday to put unprecedented limits on the quantity of grapes that they'll harvest this year in hopes of propping up prices and containing damage from the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, record amounts of grapes may need to be destroyed or sold to distilleries at discounted prices. But for the Champagne Committee, the influential group that represents 16,000 vintners around France's Champagne region, that's the price to pay for saving their luxury business. Indigenous peoples are fighting the United Nations and others who propose a 3.5 million-acre conservation project in wildlife-rich forests of southern Myanmar. The $21 million project aims to protect the region from logging, mining, and other development. Endangered species live in the proposed park areas, but Indigenous peoples who have their own conservation plans say the park would disable their traditional farming and fishing-based way of life and would prevent people displaced by civil conflict from returning home. A senior UN official is warning that Yemen is sliding towards famine as the coronavirus spreads and its economy implodes. The Assistant Secretary General of Humanitarian Affairs said Tuesday that this is happening amid a funding crisis that is forcing the UN to make deeper aid cuts, including stopping treatment for 250,000 severely malnourished children. He said the UN has received just 21% of its $2.4 billion humanitarian appeal for 2020, and he called on donors to provide the desperately needed support now. Police in New York State say they recovered about a dozen guns from the home of a suspect accused of making a threat against an Orthodox Jewish day camp on Long Island. Police say he called, allegedly telling officers, quote, "If I gotta go out there with a freaking machine gun and shoot all these people, I will." Authorities say the man had also made a call previously to complain that children at the camp were violating COVID-19 guidelines. All right, well, don't go away. More news from around the world coming up right after the break, so stay tuned. The Democratic Party has formally made Joe Biden its presidential nominee. It's a position Mr. Biden has sought for more than 3 decades and through 3 White House bids. Delegates from each state took a roll call vote during the second night of the virtual Democratic National Convention. President Trump will formally be re-nominated as his party's candidate during the virtual Republican National Convention next week. The U.S. Postmaster General says some of the operational changes that some people believe threaten mail-in voting will be postponed until after the November presidential election. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy says he will suspend his initiatives until after the election, quote, to avoid even the appearance of impact on the election mail. The Trump ally who took control of the agency in June has swiftly engineered cuts and operational changes that are disrupting mail delivery. Meanwhile, with questions about the U.S. Postal Service capacity for this fall, some election officials around the country are hoping to bypass the Postal Service by installing lots of ballot drop boxes in libraries, community centers, and other public places. Such boxes have been used with success for several years in states like Oregon, Washington, and Colorado that rely overwhelmingly or entirely on ballots that have to be sent in. But their use is being expanded because of the coronavirus outbreak and, more recently, concerns about the post office's ability to do its job. The British government says discounts on 35 million meals have been claimed by food outlets as part of its Eat Out to Help Out program. Figures released Tuesday from the Treasury show that food outlets have claimed more than 35 million discounted meals in the first half of August. Under the program, sitting customers can receive a 50% discount on food and non-alcoholic drinks at participating restaurants from Monday to Wednesday, up to £10 per person. Food outlets from Michelin-starred restaurants to international burger chains can get their discount reimbursed by the government within 5 days. A nuclear power plant in the United Arab Emirates has been connected to the country's power grid. The Baraka nuclear power plant near the border with Saudi Arabia began sending out electricity on Wednesday. That's according to the state-run WAM news agency, which published a photograph of employees working inside the plant's control room. The $20 million or billion-dollar Baraka nuclear power plant was built by the Emirates with the help of South Korea. It's the first nuclear power plant on the Arabian Peninsula. Journalists have not been granted access to the plant during its years of construction, despite repeated requests. The soldiers who forced Mali's president to resign in a coup are promising to organize new elections after their takeover. A state broadcaster aired a statement early Wednesday showing 5 soldiers who identified themselves as the National Committee for the Salvation of the People. Mali's democratically elected leader gave a statement late Tuesday saying that he was stepping aside because he did not want any blood to be shed for him to stay in power. The Belarusian opposition leader has called on European leaders not to recognize fraudulent elections that extended the rule of authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko and sparked unprecedented mass protests in the country. In a video statement released ahead of an emergency summit of EU leaders dedicated to the situation in Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya called on Europe to support the awakening of Belarus. Lukashenko, who has run the ex-Soviet nation of 9.5 million with an iron fist since 1994, won his sixth term with 80% of votes in the August 9th election, which is widely seen as rigged. Western officials refused to recognize the election as free or fair. German prosecutors say a series of crashes caused by a 30-year-old Iraqi man on a Berlin highway was an Islamic extremist attack. 6 people were injured, 3 of them severely, when a man allegedly drove into several vehicles on Tuesday evening. The incident also caused a complete closure of one of the main traffic arteries for the German capital. Typhoon Hegos made landfall on China's southern coast earlier today. Hegos is still packing high winds and whipping rain as it weakens into a tropical storm. There were no immediate reports of damage or injuries. Large parts of China have already been inundated with floodwaters, leaving more than 200 people dead or missing and billions of dollars worth of damage. An Israeli court has ruled that a collection of rare medieval Jewish manuscripts will remain at the country's National Library more than 25 years after they were smuggled out of Damascus with the help of a Canadian activist, Israeli spies, and a Syrian rabbi. The Jerusalem District Court says the Damascus crowns are treasures of the Jewish people with historic, religious, and national importance and must be preserved. The decision ends a protracted legal battle over the ownership of 9 illuminated Bibles written on parchment, which belonged to the Syrian capital's Jewish community for centuries. And that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For news on demand, you could always log on to thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. You can also watch us on YouTube. We'll see you next time.